Hello and welcome to the NFL DFS Slate Breakdown for Week 13. We got a fun slate. Can't believe it's already Week 13, and we're going to dive into that. But before we do, come join us at LineStar. We do have a free 3-day trial through the app stores if you've never tried LineStar before. That is through both the iPhone and Android app stores. So go find that. Come join us. Give us a little try. 3 free days. And you can try us out, see how you like us, and come join the fun. Now, let's get into this slate. I think it is an interesting one. There's 10 games and some interesting kind of spots with this slate. So, quick overview here. Obviously, we got the Dolphins and Commanders, 49-point total. The Lions versus Saints, 47-point total. Broncos versus Houston, 47. And then 49ers versus Eagles with a 48-point total. Now, as we always do, we go through the fastest games of the week. Also, we got New England versus the Chargers is the fastest game of the week. Now, there are some major injury concerns, also possibly some weather in that game. So it's kind of a weird one, and one that probably is less exciting than most of the faster games we've had. Next, we have Cleveland versus the Rams, another one that's not that exciting. However, the Browns defense will be without Denzel Ward, which maybe that allows the Rams to pass the ball a little bit versus the Browns, which is, at least something to consider, but also not very enticing. That Browns offense has been anemic, and it's Joe Flacco at quarterback. And then lastly, the Lions versus the Saints. So, and that is also the one I think that is likely getting the most overlooked as far as the higher game total environments. Obviously, the Eagles and 49ers jump off the page as a very enticing matchup. The Dolphins, huge favorites, huge team total, are obviously very intriguing. And then you have those two 47-point games in the Lions, Saints, and Broncos, Texans. Now, of those, I do think the Broncos, Texans has the most different paths to failing as a game. The reason being is Denver has been extremely conservative all year long with their offense. And then Texans really only push it if they are forced to get pushed. If Denver's being conservative, I think there's a high likelihood of the Texans not really getting out there and really pushing the ball. Plus, they do like to run the ball, and Denver run D has been pretty bad so far this year. So I do think that one is one that could potentially fail of the higher game total environments. All right, now let's get into it a little bit. Due to us being a couple days out, I'm not going to get all into the weather, but there are potentially some situations to watch for. So let's just go over that now. Does look cool and rainy in New England. The Jets could have a little bit of rain. And then potentially in Philadelphia as well. So those are kind of the spots, but just, pay attention to that on Sunday or Saturday night and make sure, there's not a spot where it's going to be super windy or super miserable weather conditions, because that's really the only time that there's big differences as far as the pace of play or type of play or anything like that. All right, now let's get into the slate itself a little bit. We'll start off by quarterbacks. So FanDuel, high-owned quarterbacks. We got Jalen Hurts, Tua, not even going to try and say his last name, and then Jared Goff and Sam Howell, all as the highest-owned quarterbacks, and they all kind of should be. Jalen Hurts obviously has huge upside. He is the most expensive quarterback on this slate and absolutely crushed last week with 2 touchdowns. Another thing here is that Dallas Goedert is doubtful, so he is probably not back yet, which means we have a super condensed target pool which just makes it easier when you're kind of picking a stack here. Now, Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown are both super expensive, so hard to go with a 3-man stack here, but I would say a 2 is Hurts and a 1 receiver is definitely in play. Then if you really want to, you could probably throw Swift in there if you want to continue to force that stack, or a cheap tight end that they haven't really been getting use, but you could hope for a touchdown. Next, we got Tua. Tua is obviously extremely interesting. This Washington Commanders D has been awful, terrible. One thing that we do have to bring up is they have fired their defensive coordinator, and Ron Rivera is going to be taking over that. So maybe there is some schematic differences here that makes them slightly better, but really, really hard to believe that in 2 or 3 days they're going to be able to have such a dramatic effect that makes the spot not quite as good. But the Commanders have been awful, and attacking them is probably a good thing. We know the Dolphins are going to be extremely aggressive, both through the air and on the ground. So going with them makes a lot of sense. Jared Goff is in one of the faster games of the week, so he does have some interest. Saints are typically very hard to run against. You can pass against them a little bit, and that's what, you would need to do. While Sam Howell is in a very high-scoring game, I think he's going to have a tough time against Miami. I don't love the spot, but at least he is chucking the ball. He is throwing the ball a ton, averaging 40 attempts this season per game, and over the last 44.5 attempts. So you got to love how much they are willing to allow him to air it out. And with that, he's at least in consideration. He does have some upside with his legs. So I think there is some to like here, even though it's not, a spectacular spot. But I think it is interesting if you wanted to go, say, a Commanders, go with Howell, Commanders stack, and a run back with Tyreek Hill or something like that. Could be very interesting, get you exposure to this game. Outside of that, not loving any of the other high owned pieces. Some lower owned ones that I do think are interesting. Again, I'm a little down on this Broncos/Houston game, but it obviously has to have some interest. Another quarterback spot that I'm interested in is Brock Purdy versus the Eagles. Eagles aren't very good versus the pass, and Purdy has extremely good weapons. It's a high-scoring game. If people aren't going here, I am pretty intrigued by going with Brock. As I said earlier, the Eagles have a very condensed target tree, so you could potentially get, most of Jalen Hurts' points through Smith or A.J. Brown, which I think is a pretty interesting way to game stack that game and get after it. Outside of that, I'm not really in love with anything else. Chargers D is terrible, but it's New England. And then Herbert, his wide receivers are all so banged up. I don't really want to go there either. And I don't think anywhere else really has the upside that I want on this slate. Getting over to DraftKings, high owned, we got Purdy, Russell Wilson, and Sam Howell. Crazy to me that Tua and Jalen Hurts are not higher owned. I think that at lower ownership, those two are the clear-cut best plays on the slate. Now, if we go to matchups, Purdy, Tua, both on the very top of this matchup tool. Bryce Young is in there, and it does give us a chance to talk about this game. We know Tampa Bay is a good rush defense. They're a pass funnel. They let people pass on them. And Carolina, frankly, really needs to see what they have in Bryce Young. So maybe they let him throw a little bit and come out firing. I think that is a possibility. At 6,500, I don't like it on FanDuel, but at a cheaper price on DraftKings, at least maybe some consideration 4,900 on DraftKings. I think it does warrant a little bit of consideration. All right, now let's go check out running back. So running back, higher owned. Look, Zach Moss, he is by far the chalk of the week and likely the most chalky player that we've seen this entire year, especially on DraftKings where he's 4,600. On FanDuel, he's 5,600, might keep some people away, but he's still going to be very, very chalky. And it makes sense. I mean, this Colts team has done well against good rush defenses in the past. He crushed them earlier in the season. But all in all, he is the only one that has gone over, I think, 75 yards rushing versus the Tennessee Titans all year. But with that being said, 5,600, you're getting a guy that his line for sportsbooks is 75.5 rushing yards. That is a very high line for a guy at that price. The ownership, is real. He is a very good play. The only reason you're getting off him is a game theory play. You just think he's going too high owned, where in that case, maybe he fails and you can get a little different. Rachaad White, I think, is a great play. He's in a great spot, great matchup, can really crush Carolina, who has been terrible versus the run all season long. And White has been good and consistent lately. His price is getting a little up there on FanDuel, but definitely in consideration. Ramondre Stevenson, he is fine. Chargers defense is terrible in a faster paced game, but it is that Patriots offense. How much do they really score? He has had a couple games, so at least some intrigue. This Saints situation is one we really need to look at this week because it is an interesting game environment. The Lions' past he hasn't been very good, but the Saints are likely without Chris Olave. He had a concussion. There is a chance Olave plays, so just know that. But Rashid Shaheed is out. Michael Thomas is out. So they're super thin at wide receiver. Kamara may run a few more routes. And so he's a little interesting. He has had a game of 14 targets this year. If he has, something like that again, he's going to be interesting. He's going to get there. The Lions are a little hard to rush against, but maybe he can do his work through the passing game. So I think he is interesting. I absolutely love CMC this week. I think he's in a terrific spot for dump off passes. I think that Purdy and stacking with CMC is interesting. Even going CMC and Ayuk or Debo, and then doing a Hurts and AJ Brown or Devonta Smith stack, I think is kind of interesting. Being that I think that's a super different stack that most teams will do. It is a 2-2 stack. Typically when you have the quarterback, you're going to do one or two wide receivers. But in the case of the Eagles, I just don't think you can really do a 2-man stack and get other pieces that you really want. Or a 3-man stack. So I think reversing that a little bit is kind of interesting. Miami running game. I think that is one you have to spend some time on and figure out if you want to attack. Miami has ran the ball extremely good all year. The one thing is Devin A-Chain is back. He is expected to play. How much work does he get? Do they, slow him in? Do the fact that, he came back last game, got hurt right away, missed another game. So, do they take it a little easier on him and just let Mostert run with it? Or do they let him, run with it? Those are all kind of questions you need to ask yourself, but there's a decent chance that somebody from that team gets it going. Eckler just hasn't looked himself. Devin Singletary, Dameon Pierce, they've been running the ball well lately. So I think that it's interesting to use the Texans' run game versus a poor run D, which nobody is doing. the issue here is it looks like it's a split backfield now, and I don't really know which guy to take, but at least that keeps ownership down, so you're going to be getting a little different here. Derrick Henry is in a great spot versus Indy. I like that. You also have December King Henry. Typically he crushes in December. He's in a good spot. Makes some sense to go there. And let's get over to DK. High owned guys, Moss, CMC, Rachaad White, all of which we expected. And let's get over to what it looks like here for RB1s. All right. Najee Harris. I think Najee or Warren are both interesting. This Arizona rush D has been awful. Everybody has crushed them. It is a split backfield, though, so eeny, meeny, miny, mo. One or both can get there. This offense looked way better last week, and they're in a spot that the offense could absolutely do very well. We talked about Miami. Makes a lot of sense going there. Bijan. Bijan is back being the workhorse. He had 6 targets, 3 receptions, 16 carries, 2 touchdowns. 22 carries the week before. I think once again, he is a legit play. 8,100 is probably a little too cheap for the workload. And the Jets matchup hasn't been that great lately. Mostert, 2 touchdowns. Cook, 73 yards rushing, and then 3 for 29 receiving and at a touchdown. Jacobs did fine. Eckler did fine. Barkley did fine. So this Jets matchup isn't as scary as it seems. In this game, the Jets versus Atlanta would have been the 4th fastest of the week. It's just I only go to 3, and those 3 are the only ones that really separate themselves. Jets, Falcons are just slightly faster. Henry, we went over. White, Kamara, all of them look good. And then David Montgomery, I think you can consider as well in this spot, as the Saints haven't been quite as good as normal at stopping this rush. Get over to wide receiver. So our high-owned guys, we got Hill, Brown, Hopkins. No surprises there. All are absolutely great plays. It's going to be really hard to get off Tyreek Hill this week. He's in an absolute smash spot. With that being said, Waddle has started playing a little bit better, and he's a very, very good receiver. Getting off or using him instead of Hill is some leverage. Or you could just go both of them with Tua, which it'll be hard to fit in salary-wise, but it's an interesting way to play it. A.J. Brown looks very good. Devonta Smith does too. With that being said, if you want to get off ownership but still have access to that game, DeAndre Hopkins probably a little too high owned at this spot, but in a decent matchup. Michael Pittman, you guys know, I am not a huge fan of playing him. Reason being, 10 for 100, no touchdown. 8 for 84, 8 for 64, 8 for 40, and a touchdown. 2 for 83. He just doesn't have very big games. Now, he can have 100 yards and a touchdown, and that will get you there. But his consistency is why he's priced so high, not his ceiling. He just doesn't have ceiling games very often. Only one game over or at 20 points over the last year and a half makes me really hard for me to want to pay him at 7,900. Waddle, interesting. Keenan Allen, it is one of the faster games of the week. He is questionable. We're really not sure if he's going to play. Practice in limited capacity. Had 16 targets last week. He's just been an absolute target monster, and there's really nobody else to go there. The one thing is the Patriots have been good versus wide receiver ones. Amon-Ra, dude, has been incredibly consistent, either 100 yards or a touchdown in every single game that he's played this year. So solid median projection, has had a couple blow-up games. Only $600 more than Pittman. I would way rather go to Amon-Ra than Pittman, but he is still a little bit in that Pittman category where, likelihood of a ceiling is few and far between. But this is a matchup that I think there is a potentially ceiling game because the Saints are a pass funnel. Chris Olave, look, he's going to get a ton of targets if he plays. We've gone over this receiver situation, and it's a big if there. We don't really know what's going to go on. If he plays, he's going to be higher owned, but he is extremely interesting in a good passing environment with no other receivers. Kara's going to have to just lock on him as he did last week. Jameis locked on him the week before, and I think he could continue this kind of upward trend that he's been on. Garrett Wilson, just not great for fantasy. I think Debo is interesting. Tank Dell is interesting, but he's super pricey these days. McLaurin is all right. McLaurin has started running deeper routes. So if you see his ADOT is a lot higher, what is going to happen is he's going to have less consistency with this, but I think his ceiling is going to be a little bit higher with it. So it does become of a play that is a little more intriguing to me because of that. And nobody's there. Thielen's in a good spot. If Carolina wants to throw, he's the guy. And let's get over to DK here. So, high-owned wide receivers, Tyreek, Pittman, McLaurin. Talked about them all. McLaurin is just too cheap here. Pickens is $4,800. Absolutely interesting, especially if Deontay misses. He did practice in full today. I saw he sat out on Thursday. So, Pickens is going to play. Pay down options, super interesting. A.T. Perry. Now, this is Chris Olave sits. A.T. Perry is going to be the number one, and they're going to have to throw the ball. He's 3,300. You could also look at Bowden, who would be likely the number two. But you're getting, receivers in good environments at pretty much the stone minimum, and both of them would be in consideration. With that being said, and we'll talk about him a little bit, is Taysom Hill also becomes interesting. Deontay, look, this offense that is not under Matt Canada, it looked way better last week. Does that continue versus poor defense? We'll see, but hopefully I don't mind taking some swings versus Arizona. A.J. Brown, obviously, in consideration. Debo, Ayuk needs to be talked about. All right, so Ayuk has been incredibly consistent as far as 10-plus points, but he has had massive games when he has a good game. When he goes over 60 yards, he's over 100 most of the time. So I think Ayuk is super, super interesting, and I'm definitely willing to go there. Love CMC. I love that offense as a whole. I like that game. I'm going to be targeting in that game a decent amount. And matchups. All right. So wide receiver wise, Olave, we talked about it. And this goes also for, A.T. Perry and Bowden. Lions D is not great versus wide receivers. So those cheap guys do have some interest if Olave is out. Hard to really trust Mingo. He hasn't had a game over 8 points all year. But with that being said, he hasn't had a touchdown. So if he's able to get a touchdown and Thielen doesn't have his day, somebody will versus a poor pass D. So at least it's of interest. Tyreek is in an absolute slam spot. Waddle's in a great spot. Julio's in a good spot, but it's Julio. 2023 version of Julio is just not the same. Ayuk, we talked about. So many good wide receivers up here that definitely have consideration. And let's get over to tight end now. High-owned guys, look, it's not even worthy going over high-end guys because tight end this week is super spread out. Juwan Johnson, Laporta, and Kittle are the 3 highest owned, all of which make a ton of sense for me. Another guy that I think you have to bring up in this is Taysom Hill. Look, he is their guy that can patch all the holes. He can do it all. He can run, he can pass, he can catch. And whenever, a couple injuries happen on this Saints team, he ends up filling that gap. So they're going to have a gap at wide receiver. They could go, more 12-man personnel to have him on the field with another tight end. They could just send him in the slot. They could do a bunch of different things with him. And I think he is interesting and going totally overlooked. And if Olave is out, he could have a lot of targets with his normal rushing role, which is just high. He also is used in the red zone a lot. So I think he's a very interesting piece that could be going overlooked this week and one to keep an eye on. I think this game is one that you just got to keep an eye on the injury news as far as what's going on because a lot can change. And it being one of the higher game totals and higher pace game, I really have some interest in it. Trey McBride is going to play. He's of interest. Njoku and Freiermuth are both interesting. Freiermuth, look, new OC, and he goes for 11 targets, 9 receptions, 120. Is that going to happen again? No, probably not. But he could be used a little bit more like he was years prior, where he was actually a threat out of the tight end spot. And I don't mind going versus this poor Arizona team going back to Freiermuth, especially if his ownership isn't higher. And on DK, Hunter Henry, Juwan Johnson, Tyler Conklin. Patriots wide receiver spot is very similar to the Saints where everybody's hurt. The Patriots do have Henry and they have what's his name? Why can I not think of his name? I'm sorry. You guys are probably shouting at the screen at who I am thinking about. He was on Denver last year. Gesicki. So either of them could kind of get it done. Laporta is obviously in play. The one thing with Laporta that I do have to bring up is, so he had 8 targets last week, but these last 3 weeks are the ones that he's really been used with Montgomery and Gibbs playing, and his target, came down a little bit those 2 weeks. Now, does it go back up? Maybe. But I do have a little bit of apprehension that Gibbs takes a little, a target or 2 away from him. Njoku, one of the last games of the slate. Rams aren't good versus tight end, and he is absolutely a schemed part of the offense at a cheap price. Is pretty interesting, especially when nobody is going there. And tight end, Laporta, Freiermuth, Kittle, all guys we talked about. Kittle is an interesting piece in that Eagles game for sure. So, defensive-wise, ownership is going to Falcons, Bucks, Patriots. Rams aren't pretty, but going against, Joe Flacco is interesting. So I don't mind going there. Don't mind going, say, Tampa Bay. Either defense here, Patriots or Chargers are interesting. And I think there's a lot of different ways we can go on this slate defensively. Even going Patriots or Texans or Broncos or Texans, I don't think is out of question, just due to the fact that I do think that game comes under the total rather than over. But all in all, it's an interesting slate. You guys have good luck. Get after it. Figure out how to get different. Figure out how you want to attack this slate and do it. Have a good one, guys. Bye.